a lot. I graduated in 2008 at Radio and Television Arts at Ryerson. I started out my career after the internship at CBC Sports that I took. Now, CBC was the place that I thought was the most interesting, and I liked sports at the time, and still do, believe it or not. Now, this was in 2008, and it was the start of the recession. So people were not hiring full-time, but they did bring me in every day to do odd jobs at the beginning. So I just took anything that was coming to me as a production assistant. My first job was moving an 85,000 tape library in CBC, which were these gigantic beta tapes, which you don't see as much today. Let's see. Simply being the reason I was able to get to know people in the industry was because I was working in the offices at CBC. When you work in the same office as someone, it's easier to say hi than just applying online. At CBC, I worked on pretty much everything from Rogers Blue Jays baseball, which they used to have, world figure skating, the Beijing Olympics, Hockey Night in Canada, to name a few. While I wasn't full-time there because, you know, it had ebbs and flows, I took part-time work elsewhere. At Insight Television as a television assistant TVA, and at Dome Productions as a TVA. I had my hands in a bunch of companies, and just in case things went south, and believe it or not, it did. CBC stopped broadcasting baseball. They lost the rights to CFL, and they were officially cutting back the sports department. I also decided to volunteer at Rogers Television, and unfortunately, that was a great resource while it existed, but it was a platform where you could make mistakes, and people were looking to teach you. I was at CBC for about 2 years, and I took a job on the Olympics with NBC. The reason I was able to get on with NBC was not only did I get a nice recommendation from one of the people I worked with named Barb Strain, she put me in touch with the production manager at NBC and got me on the figure skating crew. It was also because I was a local, I was Canadian, and that doesn't happen every day. You're not able to just jump into the NBC realm without knowing a contact or without living in the States, which doesn't have, well, it's obviously been a hurdle, but I was lucky enough to get that. After the Olympics, which I'll gloss over, just we'll talk about that later, I was lucky enough to get a job at the Nhl Network at CTV as a scheduler, and I worked there 5 days a week. It was an 8-month paternity leave contract. And then when that ended, I said, well, now what? Although I was applying to jobs, I didn't really know what the direction I was going. I decided to talk to my boss, who put me in touch with the operations manager at CTV, who got me into TSN as the part-time camera operator. And heck, it was an interesting transition, but doing the Rogers TV throughout this whole time, I found I was able to succeed because I had known what I was doing. Having camera op in my name instead of floating around doing random things opened a lot of doors. Having the title was what I needed, and people saw, oh, yep, we need a camera op, we'll go with that guy. Which was a lot easier than just, you know, winging it. I was able to do a lot of Dome Productions projects as a TVA, and a lot of green screen shoots at the Sky Dome for all kinds of, and all sorts of little events that they held. I was able to balance my life part-time at the part-time work at TSN and with the freelance gigs, mostly because of the scheduling that they did. I usually received a schedule 3 weeks in advance for TSN, 6 months in advance for things like the Olympics, but and it filled up my time. But all good things. CTV Globe Media was purchased by Bell Media and slowly started cutting back. And the biggest factor of all was they lost hockey. The day that TSN lost hockey, it was a funeral in the studio. It was a very rough time. But luckily, because I worked in multiple places and I never got comfortable, I found that it wouldn't have been sustainable if I hadn't been doing that. So work slowing down at TSN, I decided to go and take a master's of media production at Ryerson. The logic behind it was to improve my skills, pivot within the industry, because that's the industry I wanted to be in, and start maybe producing and creating content. At the master's, I was able to learn a few new skills, and one thing that I recognized is people were looking for people who could shoot, edit, and produce. They call that a predator. And while I was at Ryerson, I was able to get pretty good at editing and producing my own projects. And alongside my camera work, it opened a lot of doors, especially in the corporate world, to shooting and editing and producing. I also needed my own gear at the time, so I bought a Sony FS7, which I think you can see behind me on this side. Because, no, there we go, backwards camera. Since I still worked at TSN at the time, I went to Daily Planet which was working outside the CTV studios, and I became a DOP for Daily Planet. It was just 4 or 5 times a month, but it was a great job because I had a lot of creative control over the projects. TSN lost a lot of programming, anything from the Nhl Network, which worked outside of TSN, to Off the Record with Michael Landsberg, to Daily Planet, which is no longer a thing, to the reporters, to cutting back on cameras from SportsCenter and going with robotic cameras. So that doesn't help the average everyday cameraman. But I was still able to get a lot of work elsewhere because I had my hand in so many things. I got, immediately after my master's, I got on the Rio Olympics. And when working in the States for NBC, if they like you on the crew, they keep you. And fortunately, I've been able to ride that wave and go on every Olympics since. Working as a camera op, I was on tennis and water polo. It was 18 hours a day, every day doing tennis. And it was a hard grind, but a good crew. And that's not to mention the commute back and forth from the hotel, about 45 minutes. Sleep was not a thing during that period of time. A few months later, I found out that I had won an Emmy for Outstanding Technical Team Remote, which is absolutely unbelievable. Yeah, so just put that here. It's right there. There you go. Now, I've worked on a lot of shows. I've won Gemini's and Canadian Screen Awards, but this is the first time I actually got a trophy. Typically in Canada, the trophies go to executive producers and things like that. It doesn't really trickle down to the rest of the crew. And it's pretty cool to have a trophy. I am now slowing down because my wife has asked me to slow down. After school, I was working random gigs, but still needed the regular work as TSN had completely dried up. So I went to CTV at 299 Queen Street and began shooting things like The Marilyn Dennis Show and CP24 and The Social. I also started working at a new company called Media Pro, which shoots the Canadian Premier League, the new soccer league, and other things like, I don't know, hospital endoplasties, which is phenomenally interesting, by the way. That's all I can say about that. I also got to work on the Raptors 905 and a lot of the Raptors playoffs with MLSE, and I was able to get a championship ring from the Raptors, which is over here, which is kind of neat. So being a camera op, it's random, it's challenging, and in some ways it led me on a very unique and interesting path. Now I want to talk quickly about 3 main topics that come to mind about the industry and the experience that I've gotten so far. The first thing I wanted to talk about is setting yourself up properly while you're still in school before you graduate. Setting goals for yourself is the absolute most important thing you need to do before you graduate. If you don't know what you want to do with your life, you will float around and it will take a lot longer for you to succeed. While I was in school, I used this as an opportunity to volunteer. One of the things that I did was I asked to volunteer on the show called The Greatest Canadian, which led to working on Air Farce, which led to working on season 3 of Canadian Idol, which led to working at MTV. So you never know where the path will take you, but as long as your face is in the door, you'll be able to sort of ride the wave and be a part of all of these big things. My advice is to make sure when you are volunteering, make sure you know what you want to do before you do it. So like make sure it's the right path for you, because I took an internship at CBC Sports, and that just happened to end up being I've never essentially left sports to this day. So it's where your resume takes you, and volunteering in the right place is really important. One thing I'd also recommend to you before you graduate is keep your friends close. Ryerson is a breeding ground of talent, and when the year's over and you graduate, it's a commuter school and everyone goes in different directions. But the people who make lasting bonds, I have found, have been able to start up companies and work together and lean on each other for support. It's really important that you do keep your friends close. Additionally, if you're in film, before you leave school, do whatever it takes to get into the union IATSE. They take care of their people. I am not in the union, but they take care of their people, and it takes an awfully long time to get where you want to be. So start early, and you'll get to where you need to be for success. Never get too comfortable in a changing market. I think I gave you a few reasons for that, but the reason I'm still in this industry is because it's a shrinking market, but I never got too comfortable. The Canadian television industry is shrinking, and broadcasters are taking less risks. Additionally, the CRTC has relaxed many of its rules, and many of the big companies, which I will mention here, find it cheaper to purchase American programming that is tried, tested, and true instead of creating them. I chose to keep learning and changing my skills. School is a great example of that. But one thing is, I was a TVA for a long time. One thing you have to do as a TVA is wrap cables. It's grunt work, but it's a thing. So start wrapping cables, get a cable and wrap it. And then you'll actually look like you know what you're doing when you actually get to the spot. When doing things like purchasing a camera, learn the menu inside and out. It's a little thing, but it's something you absolutely need to do, especially when you're under pressure. And you need to know where things are in the menu. Otherwise, if things go wrong, you need to troubleshoot and troubleshoot quickly. There are a lot of camera ops in the industry, so you have to go above them and be better than they are by knowing more. Pushing yourself in situations where your employer sees you as the valuable asset is wise too. So if the employer sees you as the right person, the more calls you get hired more, the more experience you can get, and the better you are for yourself. So it's not so bad being the favorite. And finally, never give up. And network, of course. Starting out, my jobs were scattered. A bunch of the companies that I worked for, I had to do a bunch of companies to make full-time hours. It was tough, but I had a good attitude. And I took anything that came up and showed my bosses that I was hardworking and kept that positive attitude that has gotten me a long way. When searching for a job, I found it more useful to get personal connections. I networked while I was on the job. Everybody knows someone, so get emails, keep in touch with your contacts, and it's essential when you're working as a freelancer. I find that I have sent out dozens of resumes over the years to various broadcasters for full-time work, and it's hard to compete with a robot, which is choosing the best keywords on an algorithm. More importantly, many of the jobs you apply for are already taken before the posting has gone up. So it's a small industry. Everyone knows everyone else. So simply ask, and somebody will know somebody else, and you can bypass the computers. With everything going on right now, it has been tough. I was set to work on the Raptors playoffs. The Canadian Premier League had me on 2 Ontario teams. And of course, I was supposed to go to the Tokyo Olympics. And finding out that the Tokyo Olympics was canceled was kind of disappointing. So what did I do when I had a curveball like that, and there's tons of unemployed people, and sports isn't a thing? Well, I called a bunch of my friends, and we started a little business called Comedies Never Win Productions. It's sort of become my savior for sanity while in quarantine, keeping busy, producing, editing, writing, hiring actors, and becoming the boss. It was the logical step that I was never going to take because I never had the time. So I'll leave you with this. While you're stuck doing nothing and jobs aren't easy to come by, take out your cell phone and start creating. Become something that you would likely want to see yourself doing in the future. And worst case scenario, you've learned a thing or two. And that's all from me.
Danny, this is really awesome. Like, first of all, really entertaining, especially for someone who is not going to go into that industry, but like you really had me 100% on your talk. You're great. Also, I love the theme, like the repeating theme of how important it is to have a thick contact book, because at the end of the day, this is what really matters. Obviously, your super core skill.
No, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for this. Let's roll straight into questions. We actually had one student from the master's program, Grace. She emailed a few questions in advance. So I'm gonna kick off with those. And then please, in the meantime, everyone who is listening to us, feel free to drop your questions in the chat box and we will get to them as they come in. So the first question, let me move into it. There we go. Can you please elaborate on your ability and experiences of networking and what organizations or partnerships you pursued after undergrad? And this comes from Grace in the master's program of professional communication.
Sure. Well, let's see. Much of the networking that I've done stems from discussion and emailing and making sure that that I am keeping in touch with these people. They might not have something today for you, but maybe in 3 months, they have something for you in the long run. So I just keep in touch and keep an open dialogue and never burn any bridges. Talking to people in the industry and asking for mentorship and being able to ask people, ask others in the industry sort of where they're going. Everyone has an answer, which is what I'm trying to say. I've done the grassroots networking that way. However, joining Facebook organizations can be helpful. The one that you guys run, I'm seeing pop-ups constantly on, really important, really good places to start out your career. Let's see, some organizations, some people are always looking for a helping hand. So if you're, really want to be a camera op, but they don't have that available, start somewhere as a TVA, or start something as a PA, because that will eventually come. Let's see, it's a good place to start is in school. Talk to your professors. Talk to the right professors. If somebody has had a career working at Universal Studios Music and you want to go into music, talk to them. They might be significantly better suited to help you, pushing you in the right direction. The reason I keep getting hired at NBC is that I still keep in touch. I drop them a line all the time, and especially as a Canadian who I don't see these people every single day. If I did, there might be different dynamics, but always make sure that you're keeping in touch, and I find that that's the best way. But there's online, there's in person, there are ways to do it. Just don't overbug people.
Thank you, Denny. Also for the last point, I think that's it's important to find a balance in everything that we do. Next question from Grace is, from what you can see, what is the media industry doing in order to encourage women to enter the industry?
Well, I've seen a lot of head offices in the Canadian industry, and I've noticed that women in the industry are working everywhere, from network executives to network assistants to broadcast managers to schedulers. Head office is predominantly female dominated right now at places like CTV, at CBC. But that is where I see a lot of the females in the industry going. From a technical perspective, there are a lot of men in the industry. There are a significantly unbalanced number, but it comes down to what I've said before. Know your technical skills. Become the best you can be. There's one female camera operator named Stephanie who is great at what she does, and she works at Dome and works on all Blue Jays games, all Raptors games, all hockey games, you name it, because she is on their A crew, and she earned her place there. So like everything else, I can encourage you to be in the industry. Just become the best, become better than everyone else, and you'll do just fine.
Thank you, Denny. One last question. It's pretty interesting, actually, for everyone who is looking to freelance at some point. How do you financially and mentally tackle the freelance side to working when you jump from project to project, from contract to contract?
That's a phenomenal question. Financially, it can be difficult. Projects come out of the woodwork. Sometimes at Dome Production, they call me a day before the project started to do a 7-day stretch, which means I'd have to, well, at the beginning, I was giving up projects to do other projects because it would be more lucrative and look better on the resume. It can be tough. The balance that I found was having a part-time consistent job at the beginning at TSN and later on at CTV Downtown, filling in the gaps. I was fortunate to be able to do this because of the staggered booking. So if it was a big project, I'd find out with significant amount of advance notice, and I'd be able to give my part-time job a bit of warning. But schedules filled up, so but you have to not upset your employer by doing that as well. As far as mentally tackling a different day-to-day job, it's hard too. Sometimes the hours are crazy. Working at the Beijing Olympics with CBC, I was based in Toronto for that one, and then I had to tell my friends, well, goodbye, I'll be in the city, but I won't see you for a month. But when you get good enough, you get on a regular crew, the job gets repetitive and everyone knows what they're doing and become a well-oiled machine. So working with something like Dome Productions, where they put you on any shoot any day, you really do have to adapt. And honestly, it comes down to just quick thinking and being able to get things properly done.
Thank you, Jenny. That's very, yeah. Thank you for being honest and authentic about this. Questions now from the chat window from our participants who are online right now. Riley Martin is asking, on a broadcast production, do you think it is more valuable to know everything about one job, or is it more beneficial to be a jack of all trades and know a little bit of everything?
That depends on where you are. In the States, I found that you need to know one single thing, and you have to do it the best you can possibly do. One time in the Vancouver Olympics, I worked with a friend who was a TVA, who told me that if you look at the cable that you're wrapping, there are numbers printed along the side. Well, you have to keep those numbers very specific down the cord or the cable. And things like that I would never even have thought about, because because of my position in Canada, being the jack of all trades is sort of what you have to do to sort of survive within the industry. So in the US, you become really, really good at one thing and they keep you on that position for life. In Canada, because it's such everything's moving around so frequently, I would try to expand just on the one, beyond the one thing, only because you never know where you're going to be the next week.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Also for the comparison of both markets, because we know a number of students, have aspirations to work abroad at some point. So this is really good to know. Another question from the same student is, how does a career path in live event production look like? For example, in a restaurant, you start as a hostess, then you become a server, manager. What would be the equivalent of that for you?
So you can start out as a production assistant. Or a production coordinator. That gets you sort of in the door. But additionally, but the question asks, you have to start out as a TVA. That's where you're going to go to right at the beginning. That's where you wrap cables, you set up the live events, you understand what is going on technically around the venue. Once you do that for a few years, or shorter if you can, it's you find out where you actually want to be, and there's a bunch of different paths that you can do, camera being one of them, or technical director, or a video operator, or what else, all the audio operator, things like that. It depends where you want to be, and that would be the next step branched out. If I follow my personal career going towards as a camera op, the next logical step for me is to become a technical producer, where I can be the manager of the everyone else throughout in the venue. I started doing that a little bit at Media Pro, as it is a new company and they needed people to sort of step up and branch out. But this year, nothing yet, because it's COVID and all. And then beyond that, I haven't gotten there yet, but start doing your own thing and see where it takes you.
Thank you, Danny. Really interesting, and I'm sure helpful as well. One last question here is from the same person. As a camera op, what makes a good demo reel that will help you get noticed in the sea of applicants? That's a really good question.
It's a really good question, and I mean, you have to be a part of big events to get really big things in your reel. But when it comes to making a good, so in Canada, one of the big things is show where you've worked. Show that you, on my demo reel, I've just put logos of each broadcaster that I've worked at, sorry, which sort of helps for credibility purposes. But if it's just specifically footage that you have captured, do what you think is the best that you have. It can vary. I don't have the Kawhi Leonard shot, but a friend of mine does, so that's definitely on his reel. But do things that will will make you stand out. But it's so subjective. I have to stress that. It's a so do personal opinions, but it depends on what type of film you're in. If it's what could I say? If you're in the film industry and you want, this perfect lighting on this person, you like the content that they're showing, do that. If it's sports, see what you can muster up, and you know what, you don't underestimate yourself, because a lot of the stuff you do is probably pretty good. Just keep it in focus.
Thank you, Danny, for the encouragement as well. A question from Graham Beer. Each live production has its unique challenges. Can you please provide an example from your own personal experience about it and how you overcame it on the fly?
A recent example, well, it's not terribly recent, but it was I worked as the Santa Claus parade in Brampton. That was an interesting experience. We were running out of City Hall, and we had power for a long time. We had power most of the morning, but then, because I have a little bit of experience, I said maybe we should turn on the heaters, because it's the middle of winter and we should see how that affects the power. And of course, the power blew out half of City Hall, which was not funny at the time. Don't laugh. It was like, oh no, what are we going to do? And then it came down to troubleshooting. What can we do at that point? We called building managers. We had to troubleshoot. In the end, because it was also, I think late November, we had to find alternative sources, run additional cable, and spread out the power management. Which was, it was basically all we could do at that point. But, we chose to address every situation possible, and we ended up getting it working. That's just one example. I've got more.
Jenny, I'm sorry that I laughed at the beginning. I know with the hindsight, it's probably funny, but it must have been quite a stress show at a particular moment. I know we are running out of time, but there's one last question that I would like to read out to you from Rael Martin. In a job that involves a lot of evenings and weekends, how do you maintain your work-life balance?
It's difficult. When I was working at TSN, every show broadcast in the evening, a lot of weekend work, a lot of there's a lot of time away from the family and the projects you want to create and do. And plus, if you're away from the Olympics, you're away from your family for an entire month, which can be stressful, really, really stressful. So, in the long run, I found it a lot more, it comes down to finding the right balance for yourself. I personally was a bit fed up working evenings and weekends. I still do it, but it's not the point. And then I got a job at CTV and realized, oh, wait a minute, I can work in the morning and do a morning show, and then I still have the rest of the day after this. This is very strange. So it comes down to what how you see yourself in your work life. You need to judge for yourself your own work-life balance, because yes, they work evenings, yes, they work weekends. If you work on a standardized TV show, it's 9 to 5. Maybe you want to do something like that if it's a little bit easier for you and you get your nights and weekends with your significant others and children and all of that. So it's a tough work-life balance, but when you're just coming out of school, I was happy to do it. It was fun. I missed a few weekend parties, but overall it was worthwhile.
Thank you for keeping it real, Danny. It's really helpful. Do you still have 1 more minute for one last question? I think this is really
I've got time
to top things off. So it comes from Toby, and he's wondering, is the media production master's program worth doing right after the undergrad, or did you benefit from the time away from RTA before returning for the master's?
Great question. So I found that, listen, RTA gives you credibility. Masters, whether it's necessary, it's all up to how much you put into it. So if you put a lot into it, you're going to get see the results. Now, what I found coming back after 8 years of not doing school or anything along those lines, it was tough just simply getting back into writing essays and understanding when things are due, and what the concept of school had been lost on me, and coming back to it, it was a hard transition right off the bat, as I found that just the master specifically, they focused on a lot of theoretical knowledge at the beginning, and then we got into practical, and then we got into your own personal production, which was, I found it all, melded together and worked together. It took, but when I was in school, I found that a lot of people were in both situations. There were some people who had been out of school for a long time, and some who had been just recently out of school. The people who had recently been out of school were needed the help from the people who were seasoned. A lot of people wanted to do productions, and I was able to help out and mentor a lot of the students who were who did not have the technical know-how and wouldn't have been able to put on a production by themselves without a serious infusion of cash or somebody who knew what they were doing. So the answer lies within what I just said. You will learn a lot in the master's immediately after school, because you can talk to a lot of the people who have the experience already. However, if you want an easier time and you want a bit of mentorship, take some time off. I found a little bit of world experience goes a long way. Hope that helped.
I hope that it helped as well. I think this was really great advice to see, really, from a personal experience of someone who really took that time to kind of know what you want to get out of it when you return to it. Mm-hmm. It was amazing to have you on today. Thank you so much for, devoting that time, sharing your experience. I can see messages from students thanking you as well. I'm sure everybody enjoyed connecting with you. I know you are in the FCAD Careers Facebook group, so I would say to everyone who is here today, feel free to reach out to Jenny if you have any additional questions. I guess that works. I know Jenny is also on LinkedIn, so if there's any burning questions, I'm sure Jenny will be happy to answer them in a one-on-one setting as well. And is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely happy to help out anybody. If you know the direction you want to go in, I might not be the perfect person to talk to, but I probably know the person who's perfect to talk to, so I can help out in those kind of ways. Yeah,
if there's one thing I'm gonna remember for today, it's definitely the last piece that you just shared. Everybody knows somebody that can help you. Thank you so much, Jenny, for your time today and for talking to us. It was a great show, and hopefully see you everyone sometime soon, hopefully in person as soon as we can. Take care.
Thanks to everyone for being online, and thank you for all the thank yous.
Bye.